is the European Social Survey, ESS, which is being conducted every 2 years. And we also have the Eurobarometer studies in the context of Europe, that is, which is taking place every 6 months. I think I hear myself. Now, from the outset, it is important to know that not all European countries, not all even Southern European countries, participate in the above mentioned surveys or do so continuously, apart from the Eurobarometer survey, which is done by the bureaucracy of the European Union. I think the European Parliament is issuing this type of research. It's taking place every 6 months, and it covers all European Union 27 countries, but also an additional set of countries. The aim of the Eurobarometer studies is to see, to gauge what is the impression, what is the image of the European Union among the population in Europe, but also elsewhere. So it has a very practical and political orientation. The other surveys have a social scientific dimension. The World Value Survey covers something like almost 60 countries, the latest one. The European Value Survey covers several, not all, but most European countries. And actually, these two surveys have collaborated in the last round and produced a unified data set. Not everything in the questionnaire and results is similar, but there is a kernel, a hardcore of some questions that have been expressed and posed in exactly the same way, so you can use them for comparative purposes. Now, in fact, this incompleteness that I've talked about of the data sets among countries, among years that are being conducted, is behind the need to move from one survey to the next so that some relevant data may be identified and extracted. In other words, particular data sets do not include all countries of interest or are incomplete or not comparable, which leave us with wide margins of unpredictability. So this is not exactly rocket science, exact science. It's approximate, with all the problems that this approximation might bring about. And researchers and students need to be aware of this. The end result is such that what we get is, with some exception, of course, only indications or clues that may enlighten hypothesizing and guesswork, rather than hard and fast results. Auspiciously or not, this is so often the norm with available evidence in sociology. I'm a sociologist, so this particularly interests me. So we must deal with the situation too. Now, the so-called standard question of trust. Several transnational surveys, such as the World Value Survey, the European Value Survey, the Eurobarometer, or the European Social Survey, to which I referred to earlier, as well as more localized ones, for instance, the American National Election Studies surveys, more often than not employ the so-called standard question on trust. This question's origin can be traced back to 1952, which is quite back. In a survey conducted among students of Cornell University in the United States of America, in an attempt to ascertain, to figure, the relationship between ideology, as they called it, and misanthropy, that is, hate of other humans. So it's ideology and misanthropy. What is the relationship, if any? That was the initial topic on which this particular question evolved. The survey, the particular survey that took place, was part of a 5-item set of questions. And these questions were asking. Some people say that most people can be trusted. Others say you can't be too careful in your dealings with people. How do you feel about it? again, to quote the particular question, some people say that most people can be trusted. Others say you can't be too careful in your dealings with people, so you are reserved. How do you feel about it? Quoted in Rosenberg in 1956 on the basis of the survey initially undertaken in 1952. Rosenberg was a key investigator. Subsequently, the specific question was taken to stand alone, not as part of a 5-question set, but it was taken to stand alone and considered suitable for gauging attitudes about so-called generalized trust or impersonal trust. In several instances, sometimes slightly, it was reformulated, the question. So it took the following form, and I quote again. Generally speaking, would you say that most people can be trusted or that you can't be too careful in dealing with people? Robert Putnam has used it. Ronald Inglehart, the person who formulated the World Value Survey and also in the European Value Survey, passed away last year. Various Eurobarometer measurements and studies. It was also used in the European Social Survey in all rounds. I think it just finished the 10th round of the European Social Survey. So it's 20 years old. The World Value Survey goes a bit further back, and in between you have the European Social Survey. Now, the European Social Survey, as I said, ESS, projects deploys the notion of trust in its surveys, by which it means generalized trust or impersonal trust to tease out the existence and prevalence of social capital. Another social scientific notion, which is not very set, very exact, but it's open to debate and even conflicting ideas, but it's used. So it's social capital, another notion that you need to keep in mind. However, it emerges that whenever trust is taken to be a proxy of social capital, this is the way it's being used by Putnam or by the European Social Survey, it ends up being conflated, mixed up, squashed with social capital. It's not used as a proxy, simply put, but it's conflated. So I consider this questionable and unwarranted from a sociological point of view. And of course, I'm not the only one that thinks so. It was Robert Putnam who advocated the standard question of trust, of the standard question of trust, yes, as a most relevant tool for studying the prevalence of social capital. In practice, he adopted an untheoretical or untheorized notion, both in terms of social capital and trust formulation. Thus, the notion of trust is emitted by the question that is none other than the everyday common sense one, which may reap some results at that level only. Therefore, his earlier attempts, Putnam's earlier attempts at a theoretical formulation of trust and of social capital for that matter, ended up in a platitude. Of course, this is a critique of Putnam, who is a very well-known American political theorist and who has developed his idea, his particular notion of social capital in a set of books, like a book on the divisions of Italy, between northern Italy and southern Italy, the dividing line being around Rome, and trying to explain the development of the northern Italian regions in terms of the abundance of social capital that one can find there, and the undevelopment or underdevelopment of southern Italian regions by the relative absence of social capital, which he perceives as cooperation among humans, and so on. Now, the standard question on trust has also been criticized by being flawed in its suitability for enlisting the existence of trust, of impersonal trust, has been seriously questioned by Miller and Mitamura. According to these authors, the way the standard question has been formulated means that respondents are asked not to choose between trust and mistrust that may be seen as antithetical notions. Instead, respondents are asked to choose between trust and caution. However, trust and caution are certainly not antithetical to one another. In this sense, only one may in fact answer yes to both. Sorry, it is in this sense that one may in fact answer yes to both, so if they're not antithetical. In other words, the question's wording is inappropriate and indeed flawed, in spite of or because it has been in constant use during the last 60 or so years, 58 years. What is particularly more surprising is the fact that although the problem with the standard question has been identified for some time now and upheld in the literature since 2007 at least, its use continues unabated. For instance, in the last two European Social Survey rounds that were implemented well after the flaw has been exposed. So despite an error has been identified, the usage remains the same, which means that we do not necessarily learn from our mistakes, or that the problem, the difficulty in refining the notion, the question, of course, on trust, the generalized trust, is too heavy in the minds of many people, not all. So, such survey data that have been generated are used for purposes of comparison, even when it has been acknowledged or accepted that they do not show much that is indeed comparable. This is done while it is implied that doing otherwise, that is dropping the whole notion, would render comparisons impossible. In other words, the argument is that the standard question's use is condoned for convenience sake. However, while this may reflect the need for simplification involved in the process of translation from a theoretical proposition to an operational one can use one in the field, in the research field, the above mentioned point does not seem to suffice for bridging the observed gap. So we have difficulties with the notion of generalized or impersonal trust. And the question, the standard question has been asked, has been posed to use towards people to elicit responses. Now, it is true that more often than not, an explicit theory is not used in empirical research. The operationalist position is largely annotatable and not followed. Instead, relating a particular concept to a body of literature is the norm. In this sense, such key notions are embedded in theory, and their operationalizations are theory-laden for no other reason than to be able to measure the concepts under study. In fact, there is a commitment among researchers to, quote, specify the meaning of particular concepts precisely, end of quote, and accordingly, again, open quotation marks, develop meaning procedures which will stand for these, end of quotation mark. However, the particular standard question trust is not elaborated in a theoretical sense. Certainly, there is no flow from concept to empirical indices, as Paul Lazarsfeld, the famous methodologist, would have it. Instead, it is taken in its lay, therefore imprecise meaning, everyday meaning. Therefore, the hyperbole in the case of the standard question is that over and above the problem of its flawed construction or wording, it is the use of a lay conception of trust in its use. Still, the attitude question, it's doubly flawed. So these are problems that we have to consider when we are using this particular notion. Otherwise, we will have even more serious difficulties in eliciting what is to follow. So given this adoption of the lay perception of trust, we use trust not in a specific social scientific notion, but as everyday people perceive trust. This is the lay perception of trust. I think that it's much better from a sociological perspective to factual questions, type of questions, as those used later in the paper, rather than attributable ones, which is what the standard question, despite all of its problems, attempts to do. So, let me go a bit further. Cheers. Now I'll show you a table. This one. Okay. Now please have a look at table 1. It concerns generalized trust, and the information contained therein are drawn from a preliminary aggregate release of joint release of the European Value Survey, the 5th round or wave, and the World Value Survey, its 7th wave, which took place, both of them, from 2017 to 2018. It started and ended up basically in 2021. The question posed asks whether people can be trusted, or you need to be very careful in dealing with people. It's on top. On the left-hand side of the table, you may see the most relevant data for the 2017-18 colored in pink, while on the right-hand side, you can see data from the European Value Survey, round 4, earlier on, collected in 2008-2009. That is 14 years ago from today. Southern European countries are poorly represented. The results have not come out from Italy, Portugal, and other countries that have suffered a crisis. So it is expected that later these will come out, the results will be publicized, so we will have more complete data sets. This has actually taken place, but I have not been had the time to incorporate it in this particular table. So, what do we see in this table? It goes alphabetically. It does not include all European countries, but includes several ones. And the omissions, that is for Cyprus, for instance, has to do with the fact that the particular survey did not take place in Cyprus, or at least we don't have the results yet, or for France for that matter. I think that for some of these countries, the results have come out, the latest one. If we compare between countries, we might see significant shifts. Take the first one, for instance, Austria. Those that answer positively in the latest survey form 48.5% of the whole sample. When compared with the earlier survey, you can see an increase of people expressing a willingness to trust others. With other countries, results are different. I should firstly say, however, or I should insert a note here to say that these surveys, that is the World Value Survey, the European Value Survey, the European Social Survey, 3 different surveys, are considered to be representative types of research. That is, they have samples selected and addressed in ways in which we come near to what has been known as representative sample. Representative sample, it's a whole story on its own, but it's a sample of a population, from a population, which implies that all people there, or subjects, if you prefer, or persons, had the same statistical chances of being selected and asked questions. Now, whether this happened or not, whether they actually responded to the knock on the door, to the way they were approached, it's another matter, which is dealt with. But it's the more closely type of survey which supposedly represents a population. It is possible, if you have a representative sample, to infer and consider things about the whole population. Of course, there are margins of error, we shall not deal with that. But of course, we need to know that there are. Let's take another country from those that you can see. Let's take Greece. Greece in 2008, 2009 was expressing, those people that expressed a positive attitude toward trusting others was limited to 21.6%. In Cyprus was even less, as you can see, it's marked with yellow. And this in the latest survey of 17-18, it was chopped off. It was reduced considerably. Greeks became most untrustful. Now, if we go a bit further down, you can see the results for the remaining, I think, countries in Europe. Yes. You can see that with other countries, you have also a variation. But look at it overall, one can understand why some countries, particularly northern Scandinavian countries, Holland, for that matter, some other countries, Switzerland, are considered high trust countries, and others, like those in the Mediterranean region, but also in Eastern Europe, are considered low trust countries. These are countries in which the population expresses mistrust to a significant higher degree than in say, in the Scandinavian countries. There are good reasons for that. We will touch upon them later on. But first, I would like to give you some more information, present some more data to show the changes and the shifts. Remember, those countries that underwent a crisis are actually those on the earlier survey marked with yellow. Let me go back. So it was Cyprus, it was Greece here. It was Ireland, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and in a different guise. I'm not very fluent with that. I think Slovenia was also involved with crisis, was affected by economic crisis. Other countries were much less. It would appear that in most of these countries, as we will see with other types of measurements, there's been a reduction of trust over time. And because what happened in between 1909 and 2009 and 2017 was the global event of economic crisis, which was particularly hard in Southern Europe, particularly hard in Greece and Cyprus, from all countries affected, also Portugal. And this is the reason why we consider that the crisis has been at play, and it's the reason behind the more reserved attitude expressed in the latest survey. Okay. Now, the next table that I'm going to show you is a table that deals with the European social survey. And we take two dates, 2010, 2016, sorry. Actually, the European social survey, as I said earlier, has just completed its 10th round, but the results have not come out or coming out on a country basis. And here I focus mostly on the countries affected by the economic crisis. Again, green, you can see responses that, on the one hand, follow the call, the prompt that you can't be too careful with people, and the other hand is that most people can be trusted. Okay. Now, in this particular case, the European Social Survey is using a so-called tenfold or 11-fold gradient, which respondents pose themselves towards the can't be too careful people. Most people can be trusted. And you may want to see that, for instance, in the case of Cyprus, those that absolutely against trusting people are over here. Just almost 7%. But if you gather those that show this is not, actually this is 11-fold scale, not 10-fold. But anyway, you can also see that those that are very close are also another 11%, almost 17%, with less intensity, but towards the you can't be too careful, and so on and so forth. So if you divide it somewhere here, most respondents would seem to be reserved or very reserved. And you can see similar figures for other countries. As for Spain, in 2010 and 2016, and those that absolutely do not trust anyone, the percent in the very end has not changed dramatically. For 3%, it became 4% after the crisis. But if you take also the other gradients, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it would appear that it has, those that are more mistrustful, the number of those that are feeling more mistrustful has grown. As with Cyprus, Greece also participated in just one round of the European Social Survey, also Italy. So we don't have over time indications, but we can confirm that these are low trust countries, definitely. Let me go a bit further down. Now we go to some more specific type of questions in relation to trust always. And for instance, how much do you trust your family? In this particular table 3, the initial question posed to everybody was, to the respondent was, I'd like to ask you how much you trust people from various groups. Could you tell me for each whether you trust people from this group completely, somewhat, not very much, or not at all? And the first question concerns family. One's family. You can see that people just trust their families. It's as simple as that. And if you conflate the trust completely raw with trust somewhat, it would appear that in countries like, for instance, Greece, from where I come, 99.5% trust the families. But this is not only a Greek thing. If you look Iceland, which is out in the northern Atlantic, you will see that 90.1% trust the families, and 9.1% trust the families somewhat. Put together, it's 99.2%. So it goes on like that. There are some variation, but it would appear that people, generally speaking, just trust their families and close friends. And this is universal, more or less. Now, let's move to table 4, which concerns trust in your neighborhood, your neighbors and neighborhood. Okay. Here there is more variation, and sometimes significant variation, which reflects the local circumstances significantly, and how the notion of neighborhood and neighbors applies. It will appear, for instance, that in Bulgaria, Poland, and Romania, and Croatia, people virtually do not trust, in absolute terms, completely their neighbors, but trust them somewhat. In other contexts, if you look on the right-hand side, do not trust very much or do not trust at all these rows. You may identify cases in which there is absolutely no trust towards neighbors in various countries, including Iceland, which has a very, very low percent of absolute trust in neighbors. While in other cases, it's obviously limited. Even in the in Netherlands, which is a high trust country, only 1.5% do not trust the neighborhood at all. So there is variation. Of course, this is just a picture based on World Value Survey 2017-18 data. So it's a picture. We need additional information of these earlier studies, earlier surveys on the same question, and later ones, hopefully, which you will use to put one picture next to the other, and you can make more meaningful comparisons. So this particular table only shows you the general impression at a point in time among various European countries, and nothing more than that. So again, how much you trust? And the question here is that whether you trust people that you know personally, on a personal capacity. Let me show you the table. The same general question, but now it's personal. Okay. And you will see, of course, that people, in some cases, by almost 50%, as in Iceland, as in Spain, as in Switzerland, trust people they know personally, in absolute terms, but they also trust them to some degree, somewhat, to significant degrees and extents. And if you could look at the other hand, on the last two rows, you can see that those that do not trust people they know personally at all are limited, although they vary, and those that have a medium-sized type of trust do not trust people they know very well. It's a bit more significantly. Perhaps more markedly, it's the case of Italy, where, unless there's an error here, probably there's an error here. Yes, there's an error here in additions. So forget about Italy, but keep Romania. In Romania, we see that a significant 30% of the population, of the sample population, of the representative sample of people being asked in Romania, do not seem to trust even people they know very well. By the way, the N is the number of subjects asked, and this is a percent. So always here, N is a number of responses, and the percent sign is that in percentile terms. You can see that not all samples are similar in size. Some are bigger, some are smaller, and some are much, much smaller, but there's also an additional survey which completes this elsewhere. I should say that in medium-sized countries, there is a norm that you usually need at least 1,200 people in a country with a population of 10 or 12 million to get a representative sample if it is distributed in a particular way among the cities and the towns and the regions of the country, and the genders, male, female, and also age groups. And this is part of the process of doing the field work and selecting samples that have features of representativity. With larger countries that have a larger population, you don't need the twice or thrice the number of the initial of 1,200 subjects, but there's a formula on the basis of which you can calculate how much is your lowest minimum. It's always better to have a larger sample, but it's very, very much expensive. Hence the need to get representative samples with smaller numbers in order to be able to cope financially. Otherwise, you cannot just do the research. And the drawback in that case is bigger than having a larger sample. Larger samples have the benefit that if you go to study a particular region or city or town, you might have a sufficient number of subjects from that area to make inferences on the basis of some statistical calculations. If your sample is just the minimum set, you may be able to say something meaningful about the whole country, the country as a whole, but not about specific regions, cities, and so on and so forth. Okay. Let's then move a bit further down and see whether people respond in trust people they meet the first time or not. Again, for the same set of countries. Would you tell me for each whether you trust people from this group completely, somewhat, not very much, or not at all? That is, people you meet for the first time, okay? And surprise, surprise, in some countries, people do not trust at all someone when they first meet. So if, as in Greece or as in Slovenia, the trust completely response is not 3 or not 4%, obviously there's a problem there. People obviously are not trusting towards others that they meet the first time round. But also this might also include those that are somewhat reserved, that they trust people, that might trust people they meet the first time round. But there is significant variation, as you can see. And of course, you can go in the last two rows. Do not trust people very much, do not trust people at all. And then you can also see the reverse side of the positive responses. It would seem that in general speaking, in Europe, people do not trust very much people they meet for the first time, which is sensible in a sense, I would gather. On the other hand, the variation that exists tell us that something is missing. Why people are more prone in some regions or countries to trust others, even if they meet them for the first time, and in others they are completely closed towards them. There might be something on the background which promotes these trustful or not trustful feelings or stand. So the very description, high trust countries, low trust countries, might describe the situation but does not explain it. And I will come later on to an attempt to give an explanation, a brief explanation on this. Now, table 7 considers and asks whether you trust people that have a different religious faith, which is a clear mark of difference between you and the other person. You might be devout, X or Y, Christian, Muslim, whatever, or you might not be, you might be much secularized. But the thing is that a person's different religion, at least a nominal religion, is an indication of otherness, of difference. And this might reserve the attitudes of subjects, of people. So once the question has been asked, you can see that those that trust completely people of a different religion, which is the left-hand side row, generally speaking, are few. Those that trust somewhat people of a different religion are are larger in percentages, in numbers. Responses collected are higher, but there is significant variation, most significant variation. For instance, you can see that in Iceland, which is quite open by comparison to other countries of those people that trust completely someone from a different religion, if you add to that percent, the 73 or 74% that trust somewhat, you might end up having the huge bulk, the vast majority of your population being trustful towards others with different religion. This might not be the case with Greece, which has 20% of somewhat and 1.7% which is significantly different, or other countries like Poland, which is, as you might know, mostly of Catholic faith and is quite closed. People do not trust other people, as they declare, people with another of another religion, but somewhat they do trust them at higher numbers, and so on and so forth. So it's useful to study not the first two rows where our eye usually falls, but also the do not trust very much, do not trust the rows. That gives you a more complete picture on the basis of the particular question, with all the reservations that we've mentioned. Now, the next table, table 8, takes you here. Here, the question, the particular question asks whether you trust people of another nationality. And again, we have the fourth categorization: trust completely, somewhat, not trust very much, do not trust at all. And people of another nationality means, an alien, a stranger, different in attitude and thoughts and ways of thinking, person, by definition, more or less. And again, you might have some countries in which respondents were very reserved towards trusting completely people from a different, another nationality. For instance, in Poland, or in Greece, or in Slovenia or Slovakia, while there are one or two like Iceland and Netherlands, which people profess an openness in trusting completely people of another nationality, which becomes percentages increase when you add the trust somewhat variant. And again, do not trust very much, do not trust at all. If you look at these rows, you can also see shifts. Russia or Romania appear to be countries in which the people are much reserved, so is Greece, towards people of other nationalities. If you take the last row, the do not trust at all one. And on the other hand, countries like Switzerland or Spain, or for that matter, Croatia or the Netherlands or Iceland, it would appear to be countries in which the respondents expressed a willingness to trust more people from another nationality, as the percent of do not trust at all is quite low by any comparison. Okay. Now here we have another table which asks whether you have confidence in government, in the government of your country. And of course, this reflects the government that was in office at the time of the survey, which might not be the same one as today, for instance. In most cases, it's not. And also cannot contextualize sufficiently the political situation in X or Y country, which might be vastly different, or definitely is vastly different, or even the political momentum or moment when the question took place. If something big in a country's politics is taking place and the government has fallen short, then mistrust would flourish. If the government appears to have done well, then it's more, people respond in more positive senses. So this is an element of context and of change, of micro change, which cannot be grasped by the question and the responses. It's just therefore a photograph of a particular time. Again, the high trust, low trust type of countries is reflected in the responses received in this particular question. I mean, the pattern of Scandinavian countries plus Netherlands or Switzerland as high trust countries, Mediterranean European countries and Eastern European countries as being countries marked by low trust is reflected, I think, here too. But let's have a little look at the various respondents. Do you trust the government of the day? A great deal, quite a lot, not very much, not at all. Those that do not trust at all, it's in the last, before the total one row, you know, you can mark Croatia, Greece, and Spain, marked in yellow, but also you can add Romania, or for that matter, those countries which have a almost 30+% negative response rate, which indicates that our people very often quite reserved towards the government of the day, and those responding not very much are also identified with particular groups, plus Slovenia and Italy. Therefore, there is variation, but apparently there is quite a lot of mistrust towards the government of the day, following the pattern that I earlier mentioned between high trust and low trust countries. And those that trust the government of the day a great deal are usually a very small minority of respondents. Croatia apparently was undergoing some kind of crisis, has an almost not trust level towards government, or Greece, or Slovenia, or Spain for that matter, or Romania, or Italy, 3.2%, or Iceland, or Armenia. So this is also something to consider. Just let me move on to some preliminary, by necessity, conclusions to round up this part. The provisional conclusions that can be drawn from this data on the basis of the earlier discussion on trust and the problems with the particular question being posed, the standard question, its variation and variance, are the following. There are good indications that trust in the last decade has suffered, and this can be linked to the crisis, the economic crisis. Also, clearly, trust has waned in the case of some East European countries, and particularly so with Greece and Cyprus and Slovenia. This should also be related to the relevance of low trust culture linked to an underdog culture. In political science, you have a whole discussion about the underdog culture, the developing culture, the dominant culture, and so on, which I will not enter into, but I will just refer in very broad terms to this discussion. Thus, whenever we have low trust countries, the economic crisis of the past decade appears that it has exerted a negative influence that only exacerbated an already adverse situation. It's not that the crisis is responsible for the whole negativity towards trust, but from an already negative situation in relation to trust, or you trust others, the crisis came along and intensified the fears, the anxieties of those people that were feeling that they cannot trust others. So it exacerbated the whole thing. Therefore, and overall, the crisis, it will appear, has adversely, as I said, affected trust in society in the case of Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Greece. However, Spain exhibits sign of recuperation on that front, of changing it. The perception and the idea of how to stand towards trust terms towards others. What to do to improve trust? Basic question. It seems pertinent to look at the Scandinavian interpretation of uplifting social trust, namely that when the basic mechanism of public life are not functioning properly, and these basic mechanisms of public life are promulgated, are controlled for largely by the central state in each country. And if they're not functioning properly, then individuals, myself, you, someone else, do not trust one another. If so, the next step would be to call for a transparency and a well-meaning functioning of public life. You need the public life to be transparent, to be trustworthy. And this enhances the context in which trust develops, even interpersonal trust or trust towards others. Because the system is a system which you can actually trust, rely upon. Therefore, why not face others in a trustful way? But if the system is such that you don't trust institutions, if the various regulations and rules do not function in a transparent way, then you tend to be mistrustful, and you also towards these institutions and the workings and the mechanism, and you take this experience in your relationship with individuals as well, unknown to you or even known to you, different individuals. So it would appear, as I said, that if we call for transparency and a well-meant functioning of public life, this might enhance our perception and understanding and feelings of trust towards others, individuals, others, unknown to us, others. I think it's worth not forgetting that the social scientist, particularly the sociologist's task, to paraphrase Willem Obert, a Swedish Swede, the social science task is to infuse the public debate with a modicum, small portion, hopefully, of rationality. In his own words, the most important task of sociology, social science, you can generalize this, is to strengthen and defend rationality in public discourse. And I think that this rounds up the first presentation I had to do today. Now, the second part, I will have to close this. Hopefully find the second one. This is what I presented. Sorry for this. Trying to figure out where the, here we are. Okay. Now, the second part of my presentation concerns the European Union more directly, the image and perception and reflection of the European Union in European Union countries, basically as ascertained by the Eurobarometer studies, surveys. I will not use all Eurobarometer surveys. I will use just one. I will come back to this a bit later on. Let me firstly try to clarify the notion that we are using here, image, perception, and reflection. Now, by image, we mean a representation of the external form of a person or thing in art. For instance, her work juxtaposed images from serious and popular art. And some similar terms are likeness, resemblance, depiction, portrayal, representation, statue, and so on and so forth. Of course, this is just one sense. Then there's another sense of image, which is a visual impression obtained by a camera, telescope, microscope, or other device, or displayed on a computer or video screen. Here, image is similar to picture, the snapshot. Okay, and then we might have a third sense of a particular notion, which is a simile or a metaphor. So, image is a simile or a metaphor, which is, I think, the way we're using it here as a metaphor. Now, perception. Perception is the ability to see, to hear, or become aware of something through the senses. And a second sense is the way in which something is regarded, understood, or interpreted. And I think that we're using these senses of the word in an alternative way. Reflection, on the other hand, is the throwing back of a body or surface of light, heat, or sound without absorbing it. Reflect. So it means sending back, throwing back, mirroring. And a second sense of the word is serious thought or consideration. I think this is what we want to, we're using the way, this particular notion here, as a serious thought or consideration. So when we talk about image perception reflection of the European Union countries, it has to do with how the European Union as an institution appears, emerges, what its image, then how it is perceived by people in various countries, and how this perception is reflected back in the central bureaucratic organizations and the personnel, high personnel of the European Union, and has to do with this interplay. So it might be useful to start with a European Values Survey question that asked whether people are confident, have confidence towards the European Union, to give you a glimpse of what that might involve, which is back, this goes back to 2017-18, and then use a more recent Eurobarometer study of 2001 and explore it a bit. As you might recall, as I said earlier, Eurobarometer studies take place every 6 months. There is a basically similar set of questions being posed each time. Sometimes there is a special emphasis with some additional questions, and there are cases of some extra Eurobarometer that is focused on particular issues. The one we will be referring to is the last Eurobarometer study that took place before the generalized spread of COVID. It is the beginning of COVID. Why we're using this particular Eurobarometer study and not later on, because there are a couple of later ons. It has to do mostly about, it relates to the way it was conducted. More recent Eurobarometer studies, because of COVID, took place with distant means, and there is an ongoing debate whether the representatives that Eurobarometer studies call for has actually been achieved, given the fact that the usage of electronic means to communicate is not prevalent to the same extent in all countries and all age groups. Older people are much more difficult to get by and use electronic means than younger people, and so on. So there are some discussions. I will come back to a bit later on. Let's first have a look to this 2017-2018 question and the responses obtained from European Value Survey and European and World Value Survey data set. The question was, I'm going to name a number of organizations. For each one, would you tell me how much confidence you have in them? Is it a great deal or confidence, quite a lot of confidence, not very much confidence, or not at all? And here we touch only on one of them, sorry, which is the, only one of them, which is the confidence in the European Union. As you might see from this first sample of countries, of European countries, it would appear that countries like Albania or Bosnia and Herzegovina are much more confident with the European Union than others. Albania has a quarter of its population, of the sample population, responding positively that they trust, they have confidence a great deal in the European Union. And quite a lot have also another 45%. So if you take these together as positive stance towards the European Union in terms of confidence, you end up with roughly what? 50, 70% of the population being favorable, feeling confident towards the European Union. In other countries, it's less so. So just let me, now you've got a glimpse of this one. I'll move to the next part of the table. Okay. You remember that Albania has a quarter of its respondents saying they are very confident, a great deal towards the European Union. In 2017, in Greece, it was just 2%. Why? Obviously, the crisis and the fact that some political parties, including the main political party at the time, the governing party, but also other political constellations, were blaming others, like the European Union, for the negative effects they had on the crisis that was still developing in Greece. In Greece, it took place, the economic crisis lasted for almost, well, normally it has ended, but it lasted something like 80 years, formally. Informally, people might argue that you still have a crisis, but that's another story. Or that the crisis has been regularized. On the other hand, sorry, countries such as Lithuania, you might see in the lower end side. No, you cannot see that, Lithuania. It's a bit down. Yeah. Although they don't trust very much, a great deal, they're not confident towards the European Union. In relative terms, well, they do have a quite high degree of confidence. And again, you can see the variation we've already mentioned in terms of the type of responses obtained. Look a bit further down this particular table and the countries involved. You can see Montenegro to Turkey, and the degree of absolute confidence, a great deal rather, again fluctuates, and fluctuates more with the quite a lot type of confidence, which is more reserved in cases like Serbia, and more positive in cases like countries of like Portugal, which has almost 60%, quite a lot degree of confidence in the European Union as an institution. On the other hand, Russia exhibits a very high degree of mistrust towards the European Union. Not at all, 40%, not very much in the Russian case, another 36.6%. Taken together, it's what, 77%. are very negative towards the European Union as an institution. They don't confide in it. Serbia is also quite high. Now, in Serbia, there were two surveys done separately, the European Value Survey and the World Value Survey. So we have two figures for Serbia. He also has the same thing with Germany, I think, and possibly another country. You have two surveys, which do not show things significantly different, which is an indication that the survey more or less caught what was the case. You can see Serbia 2017-18. The one is the European Value Survey. The other is the World Value Survey, which I do not recall at this particular moment, but it's in the table. You can see it's 39.4%, 36.3%. Again, the not very much raw. It's the one it's 40.6%, the other is 40.7%, and the quite a lot raw, 17.4, 19.2, and two great deal, 2.6, 3.8. They are similar, which indicates that the survey was done correctly, appropriately, more or less. Does reflect the situation. And the last part of this table has to be broken in 4 parts because of the countries involved. Is the Ukraine before the war, North Macedonia, and Great Britain. Again, you have fluctuation here in the image of and perception of the European Union as an institution vis-a-vis the population of these countries, represent the samples of the population of these countries. Okay. Now I will just do I have here an indication of tables, but I will close it for you and open another one. It's the Standard Eurobarometer 94. Actually, we're now in the Standard Eurobarometer 96, which is winter of 2001-2002. I will be using this one, which is a bit earlier on. And the reason is that that's Eurobarometer 94, winter 2020-2021. Actually, it was conducted or all of it was closed in March 2021, just when the COVID disease ailment, infection, was spreading in its first round, to be followed by others. So it was, the sampling was taken in more or less traditional ways by questionnaires, knock on the door, and getting some samples that are more or less representative, which is, I suppose, the way to do it. So it's more, the results are more acceptable than by everyone, might be quite, the results of subsequent Eurobarometer studies might also be quite acceptable. But that was a key point in be sure that we're using data that are more or less, that are more valid or more acceptable than in other cases. Now, I will take you to some of the questions. I will not delve on them very much, but I will take you to some of the questions. I think it's in page T. Hold on. T38, right. I have to rush through. Okay, sorry for this difficulty in identifying. The question posed was, how much trust do you have in certain institutions? For each of the following institutions, do you tend to trust it or not? Or you tend not to trust it? The European Union. And it was asked in all European Union countries, plus additional ones. The question was divided with tend to trust, the first round, tend not to trust, and don't know. So it was simplified in relation to others. Those on bold with bold were the responses given to the particular Eurobarometer study, and those in lighter numbers was the response given to the previous Eurobarometer study. So you might see some differences, 6%, 2%, minus, plus, and so on and so forth. Might be of useful of some for certain purposes. And you can see that in the winter of 2001, with an average trust level of 49%, most countries were trusting towards the European Union, with some variation, of course. In Cyprus, in which we are now, right now, it was 39% of tending to trust the European Union, whilst the majority, 52%, tended not to trust. And there was also a 9%, I don't know, don't respond type of question of responses. And depending on the country you want to choose, for instance, Portugal is very high, is 78% tend to trust, 21% tend not to trust, and only 1% I don't know. Apparently, Portugal at this particular point in time, the European Union, for whatever reasons, we're not really familiar with the rationale or the situation, the context, which is something to look upon if you want to study the case further. It would appear, however, that it's quite trustful, highly trustful towards the European Union. In Sweden, 58%, or in Finland, 50% were tended to trust the European Union, while a significant number tended not to trust. 50%, Finland is split. Okay. Latvia is also 70% in favor of the European Union, whilst 30% is reserved. Spain is on the majority favorable to the European Union, while a sizable minority of 38% tends not to trust the European Union. So this gives you a picture in time in relation to the specific question. And then we can move to something else, again, drawing from this particular question, because we said image, perception, and so on. One question posed to people was, have you heard of the European Parliament? And some of them said yes, others did not. Have you heard of the European Commission, which is the government of the European Union? Have you heard of the European Central Bank, which is the euro, the money? the money and the monetary arrangements. Have you heard of the European Council, which also plays a very important role, or the European Parliament for that matter? As we said earlier. So I'll just go through and show you some of these information obtained, starting with the European Parliament. The question was, have you heard of the European Parliament? It's page T41. So not very far away. Right. The European Parliament. Okay. And here you have the European Union average, which is 86% have heard of the European Union, of the European Parliament, while 13% said they don't know anything. And if you look at individual countries, some of them have quite high perception of the existence of the European Parliament, like in Belgium, with 94%, or Latvia is 84%, LU is Luxembourg, 93%, Slovenia and Slovakia is 94, 93%, Finland 94%, in Cyprus 90% knows about it, but 8% says they haven't had it. The reverse is the interest here. Those have never had of the European Parliament, which is appears quite high in Hungary, or in Poland, or in Romania, although these are European Union countries. If we go a bit further down to see whether they've heard of the European Commission, which is the government of the European Union, Commission, yes, you can see that the European Union average is 77%. So apparently 21% has never heard of the European government, of the way Europe is being governed by the European Commission, the highest apparatus, which is in a sense amazing, but still there. So perhaps it's worth looking at those that have never heard of the European Commission, which is, you know, in Estonia it's 21%, in Greece, which apparently, as it was shown earlier, did not at the time had a positive perception of the European Union as a whole. It's 16%. They've never heard of the European Commission. In Latvia, it's 24%. In Lithuania, it's 34%, very high by this standard. In the Netherlands, which is next to Holland, where the Central European apparatus, and Brussels, where the European Commission is station is situated, it goes up to 37%, which implies that the penetration of the European Union institutions in that society, at least in terms of image and perception, is limited. While, of course, this is a very open country, Holland, it's something, you know, which gives you food for thought, or gets you involved with comparing things and understanding how some things are perceived, and so on. Now, here we have the question asked whether you have heard, tend to trust, not to trust the European Parliament. And the European Union average 50%. And again, perhaps it's worth looking at the negative appraisals of the European Parliament, which is 59% in Czechoslovakia, Czechia, the Czech Republic, not Czechoslovakia anymore. It's 55% in Greece for its own political reasons at the time. And in other countries, it's quite high, like Slovenia and Slovakia, Slovenia and Slovakia, yes. But also in Finland, the European Union is not very highly appraised by this figure, or for that matter in Cyprus, or in France even. And what about the European Central Bank? Do you trust or tend not to trust? Do you tend to trust, tend not to trust the European Commission? Sorry, that was for the European Commission. So it was a bit mixed up. The European Central Bank. By the way, the European Commission, that is a governance. Yes, the picture here. And the European Central Bank. Belgium seems to trust it, 70% of it's 30% mistrust. In Greece, it's the reverse. 30% is trust, tends to trust it. 66% that tends not to trust it. In Italy, there's a huge number of no, don't respond. But also in France, it's almost shared between 40% and 38% of trusting, intends to trust, and tends not to trust. But 20% do not wish to respond. The higher non-response rate is in Poland, which is telling why, the question becomes why so many people do not want to respond to this particular question. Are they tired because of the interview? Do they have some hidden ideas? This is something to explore. And I'm sure that the bureaucrats in Brussels have actually looked into the matter or are looking into the matter. Negative responses in trust terms, you also find in Slovenia, well, slightly negative towards the positive responses. We're talking about the European Central Bank, the bank that issues the euro, which is the currency for 19. Today, I think it became, we have 20 countries. Slovenia is also part, I think since yesterday or today, have the euro as a common currency. And you tend to trust or not to trust the European Council, which is an institution many are not aware of. So you have a rather low percentage of positive appraisals towards the negative ones, right? And this varies depending on the country and situation. For instance, tends to trust is rather low in Greece, in France, in Cyprus. But on the reverse side, it's quite high in Portugal, Sweden, or Malta, 65%, and in Denmark, but also in Belgium. I understand that this is a bit tiring for you. It's also for me. There's one question in particular which asks our country, Malta, Cyprus, Denmark, Sweden, in the European Union context, could better face the future outside the European Union, which people are asked to say whether they agree or disagree with that particular statement. So let's go and have a look at this particular, the responses listed in particular question. Our country, you put the name of the country here, could better face the future outside the European Union. The overall totally agree, tend to disagree, totally disagree. So you can actually group these two together and these two together. Is, the average for the European Union is 9% totally agree that the country would be better outside the European Union, and 18% tend to agree, which is a minority, in obviously a small minority, but there is a 29% of people that feel that they tend to disagree with this statement, that they would it would be better for them to leave the European Union. Remember, this is after the Brexit, or in the course of the Brexit, rather, to be more precise. And here we have a 37% which totally disagree with the previous statement and feel that obviously the European Union is the place to be. And you have the total agree rate here and the total disagree rate here. It's a bit perplexing. You need to spend some time. So let's just focus on the first two categories, totally agree, totally disagree, for our present purposes. And you can see that even in countries which have a grudge to the European Union, totally agreeing that it would be better for them to leave the European Union, you actually have a small percent, 13% in Greece, 16% in Cyprus, and that's 16% in Austria, 11% in Italy, 11% in Hungary, 11% in France. And if you also add this row, which reads, tend to agree, not completely, but tend to, again, you see that in most cases, they do not, for Greece, for that matter, which was politicians of various political colorations blame the European Union, if not for all the country's problems, for a good deal of them. And yet the population responds that they, indicating that they do not wish to leave the European Union by totally agreeing to this statement that it would be better for the country to leave the European Union. And this is also true for Cyprus or other countries which have a high rate of agreement with leaving the Union. So I think that yes, we can also take the next one, which asks, to what extent do you agree or disagree with each of the following statements? And the statement in question is, more decisions should be taken at the European Union level. Apparently, more people feel likewise. And which is a statement that enhances or potentially enhances the power of the European Union to take central decisions versus taking decisions locally, that is at the country level by each country's government. Therefore, implying in the question is a ceding of authority from national governments to the central European bureaucracy, which operates like a quasi-state, not a full state, but a quasi-state. And interesting enough, totally agreeing 25% in Greece and partly agreeing 47%, whilst given what we've said about Greece earlier on and mistrustful, and in Cyprus too, a big chunk of the respondents, actually 85% or so, feel that it's worth ceding more authority to the European Union. This might reflect the political situation of the country at the time, and also the major problem the country is facing with being divided and having an occupation force in part of it, and so on. But you also have it with Portugal, where definitely almost 90%, 34 plus 35, 55, are in favor of ceding more authority to at the European Union level, to the European Union bureaucracy, while it's much less in Scandinavian countries, which feel that the state is rather well functioning, both in absolute terms and more relative terms of agreeing with the statement. Okay, so to conclude, there's a lot of give and take in the ways the European Union's image is reflected, perceived in the European Union countries. This obviously patently relates to the political situation and the political moment when the question was put, and whether the European Union has been seen to play an active role in curtailing, in solving problems, curtailing problems, and has the exposure to do so. So this is largely related to the public image, to public relations activities and the public image of the European Union. And of course, being the Eurobarometer study is financed by the European Union for this purpose primarily, but also to collect some relevant data. We have not included questions at the initial stage of the COVID-19 ailment. There have been specific Eurobarometer studies that address these issues with interesting results. These are open, so you can enter the database and download them. All you have to write in your computer is in Google Eurobarometer studies, and it will take you there. These are downloadable easily. They don't even ask for your email account. You don't need to register, as far as I know. And it's worth pondering and seeing how a transnational organization as the European Union, which is not a federal organization, it's not like the United States, for instance, or some other countries that are federal. It depends on each particular country ceding part of its authority to the central European bureaucracy, and the rule of absolute, not majority, but in key items, you need to have unanimous decisions. And of course, this is the way to block decisions as well, not ceding a unanimous decision. Is involved with the European Union project, which hopefully has some time to progress, and hopefully it will. Hopefully in the sense that there's been active in averting war and open conflict in the European continent until among its members since the Second World War. And now we have also war in Europe, in the Ukraine, which shifts things significantly and also highlights the importance of consultation, of bargaining mechanisms in which the European Union has excelled and is excelling. Whether they will succeed playing a more active role vis-à-vis the cessation of the fight and the war and the suffering in the Ukraine, and how it will come about, is of course an open issue. But with this in mind, I would like to round up and close this session as well. And I hope some of these things that we presented make sense to you, and even you might have enjoyed them. But for further information, I would ask you to, will invite you to go to either the Eurobarometer studies or register with the European Social Survey, the World Value Survey, the European Social Survey, again, easily accessible through the Google search machine, and identify from there these sources. All you need to do with them is to give them an email address and register, and download the relevant data, which are very rich and worth pondering into. They don't have an absolute value, they have a relative value. One needs always to be cautious, but they are telling of, are useful in identifying trends or thinking about them and trends. So this, I will bid you farewell, and I have to close this session. Thank you so very much. Ναι, γεια σας, έχω τελειώσει εγώ, Πολιόδος Σοκρατής. Γεια σας. Ναι, θα έρθει κάποιος να αλλάξει, γιατί θα έρθει η κυρία Γαλάνη τώρα. Και σας παίρνω από το θέατρο κάτω που κάνουμε την αναμετάδοση. Μάλιστα. Και μου είπαν να πάρω ένα τηλέφωνο, σε αυτό το τηλέφωνο, για να πω ότι όταν τελειώσω εγώ να έρθει, για να το κλείσετε κάπως, ώστε να έρθει η επόμενη Ωραία,
υπάρχει μεγάλη κενό.
Ναι, ναι, ευχαριστώ.
Ωραία, έγινε, γεια. Good morning. The aim of this workshop is to examine the multiculturalist policies and practices developed by the EU in order to understand and to deal with cultural diversity generated by global migration. We try to focus on the models used, especially in the EU, in the European region. But of course, we should say that the application, the adoption of multicultural models is not something new. It is not a new technique or practice, because there are other countries, especially Canada and Australia, which tried and which developed the first multiculturalist policies and practices. Especially during the 1960s, political leaders sought to resolve differences, especially, in Canada, to resolve differences between areas of the country, of the Canadian country, dominated by either Anglophone or Francophone citizens, by introducing a policy of bilingualism. But before continuing, we should try to define the meaning of multicultural, and especially the meaning of cultural diversity. So cultural diversity is a complex issue which includes and reflects several aspects of human personality, such as nationality, ethnicity, race, traditions, customs, values, religious beliefs, political views, language, sexual orientation, ancestry, parental status and marital status, educational background, income, gender, and age. So we can see that it is a very huge, and very large issue. Cultural diversity can be found in every form of human activity. And because of that, tensions between people from different cultures will arise easily. But if we think about what Claude Lévi-Strauss said, all the forms of this diversity may take all these forms contribute to the fullness of all the others, which means that this diversity can enrich our societies, our communities, and the individuals themselves. But the problem is how to cope with cultural diversity, especially nowadays where we live in multicultural societies. There is a constant flows of migration, and many times we affront this migration, if you like, as a threat to our societies and to ourselves. So we try to deal with cultural diversity by adopting cultural diversity policies which build bridges between and within societies. That means that we should try ease tensions between communities from different cultures with a view to ensuring international and national security. It is important to manage cultural diversity in order to become an asset to cultural and economic growth and not a threat. Multiculturalism, it's an approach, we could say, that tends to preserve the cultural freedom of all individuals. Multiculturalism provides recognition of the cultural contributions of diverse ethnic groups to society. It rejects the ideal of the melting pot, in which members of minority groups are expected to assimilate into the dominant culture. it endorses an ideal in which members of minority groups can maintain their distinctive collective identities and practices. And in general, multiculturalism policies encourage the integration of immigrants into society and provide fairer terms of integration. But there are different models of, there is a different model as well, apart of the multiculturalist model. There is the assimilationist model, which is a different practice and which represents a universalist nationalism. The idea of the assimilationist model adheres to social cohesion, which means order, not justice. It perceives that the nation, people, and culture are an integral whole. It expects solidarity from all minorities, of all immigrants. It awaits that immigrants and minority groups are to be incorporated into the dominant culture of society. So we can see that the assimilationist model and the multicultural model are quite different. I mean, they are the extremes, and they have a quite different point of view as far as the integration is concerned. So the question nowadays is multiculturalism or assimilation. Multicultural policies or assimilative-oriented policies in the EU, it is an issue, it is a debate, and nowadays we can say that there are multicultural policies and assimilative-oriented policies in the EU at the same time. But we should discuss a little bit about the history of the situation. Why? Because Canada and Australia, as we said, were the first countries to adopt, to develop, and to apply multicultural policies. And the EU, the European region, adopted some of these policies and practices. But during the last 10 years, the conditions of immigrant communities and ethnic minorities living in the European Union have become harsher. Multicultural practices have been constantly under discussion and face more and more difficulties in being really implemented. Legislative trends in a number of EU member states show that the notion of integration is becoming more restrictive in character and now focuses mostly on cultural aspects, such as courses for the acquisition of language, history, culture, and civic and social aspects of the receiving country. Integration no longer seems to be considered a two-way process between migrants and the host society, as defined in a pivotal European Commission communication on immigration, integration, and employment. We have to say that the last years, there is a backlash against multiculturalism across Europe. And this is because there were, we consider minorities integration as a threat, and there are some reasons for that. First of all, it might be that some EU member states are not ready to become immigration societies. I mean, why? Why there is this backlash? Because there are many member states which are not prepared, not yet, to integrate immigrants, to give them the same rights, to recognize their rights, their traditions, and they feel threatened by these immigrant flows. There are other reasons as well, such as international terrorism. International terrorism has really provoked a lot of threat in Europe, but not only in Europe, but the European citizens, the European communities feel much more threatened. So they think that they need policies which are going to protect the dominant culture, and they are not quite open to this immigration and to the multicultural integration, especially. Another reason for this critique and this backlash is the changing nature of global migration as well. The large influx of immigrants putting pressure on EU member states, new social formations across countries, the continuing poor socioeconomic standing of immigrant and minority groups. There are a lot of intense debates about the role of immigrants and the role of Islam in Europe. And that's why we realize that there is a strong critique against European models of multicultural integration. But we shouldn't forget that the European Union is established on the multicultural motto of united in diversity. This means that a cultural diversity consists the core of the European Union and the European mentality. And when we say united diversity, this means that, of course, there are differences among the EU countries, but these differences can be bridged and should be bridged through a shared common European heritage and identity. The EU must approve cultural diversity among its member states. The EU identity includes a set of common principles and values, such as respect for human rights, democracy, and tolerance. This view suggests a framework that involves multiculturality and cultural minorities. So we understand that since the European Union is formed and developed on the mode of uniting diversity, it can't exclude cultural minorities and cultural diversities even from countries, from third countries, which are not EU members. The European identity of united in diversity has been challenged by increased legal and illegal migration. This is a problem because there are a lot of illegal immigrants. As well, this idea, this mentality, this philosophy of united in diversity is challenged as well by the globalization, the expansion of the EU, the advent of Islamist movements in the Arab world, the EU's desire to play a global role, the political engagement of a growing number of European Muslims. So all these factors affect and challenge the European identity of respecting the cultural diversity, protecting the cultural diversity, and building a European region which protects and includes, of course, and integrates the all kind of cultural diversities, European and exterior as well, cultural diversities. Of course, the European Commission takes some initiatives and develops policies and practices in order to protect and promote diversity and inclusion. The European Commission has been committed as well to combat discrimination through legislation and bring about equality, enable European citizens to reach their full potential. And one of these initiatives is the European Diversity Month. It is a special, we can find, this initiative in the EU Platform of Diversity Charters, which embodies the European Commission's long-term commitment for diverse workplaces and inclusive societies. Especially, the European Diversity Month raises awareness of the importance of diversity and inclusion in our workplaces and in the society throughout the whole European Union. It celebrates organizations' efforts in promoting diversity and diverse teams in the workplace and in creating inclusive working environments. It invites all organizations in Europe, whether a signatory of a diversity charter or not, to take a stand for diversity and act about it. Of course, this initiative is one of many others practices, policies, and initiatives developed by the European Commission, which demonstrates the strong will and the strong commitment of the European Commission to protect cultural diversity and to integrate immigrants, to respect them, to give them the same chances as far as work is concerned, as far as human rights are concerned as well, and to try to make them equal citizens in a large European space. Diversity charters is an initiative as well, which is developed since 2004. There are 26 diversity charters which have been established in Europe. They provide support and promote best practices in diversity management to thousands of leading multinational companies, public organizations, and non-profit organizations. It is an initiative which try to promote especially diversity, cultural diversity in the workplace. There is as well another project which promotes the respect of the cultural diversity. It is the EU-funded project DIVID, the challenges of diversity for current societies. It was a project developed in order to promote the impact of diversity on social capital and well-being through the lens of the identity. It investigates on how newcomers affected societies and what the real impact is on these societies' well-being. And at the end of this project, of this research, the findings show that on a personal level, individuals may feel that ethnic and religious diversity threaten their culture or identity, but on the other hand, the effect of diversity on the country overall is a positive one. That means that even if, as individuals, we feel threatened by the immigrants, by individuals of other ethnic and religious beliefs, as a country, as a whole society, we are enriched, and we become more powerful through this approach, and by living side by side by people coming from other cultural origins. These are the references. If you like, I thank you very much. And I hope that you find this presentation interesting. Thank you.